from the moment a human is born and interacts with the objective world, their mind is immediately thrown into a massive matrix of reference systems. Through education, culture, and social molding, we are equipped with a dualistic lens to view and evaluate all phenomena. We are taught how to label everything: what is right and wrong, what is noble and lowly, what is beautiful and ugly, what is success and failure. The clinging to these artificial metrics grows over time, turning into a solid block of prejudices nailed into perception. Humans voluntarily step into and lock themselves in the prison of standards without realizing that this narrow reference system is the root of all torment, resentment, and the bloodiest conflicts in history. We always carry an arrogant ontological illusion that my perspective, my feelings, and my value system are the absolute truth of the entire universe. When reality operates deviating from that narrow frame, we immediately judge, suffer, and use violence to mold reality to fit our desires. During the Warring States period, while schools like Confucianism and Mohism were plunging into endless fiery debates to fight over whose doctrine was the supreme standard, Zhuangzi appeared and delivered a thunderous blow to the entire thought foundation of the era. Through the equality of all things chapter, Zhuangzi wielded the phenomenological hammer, smashing all dualistic metrics of humanity. He pointed out a naked and cruel truth: there is absolutely no absolute value existing in this world. All judgments, all concepts that humans worship are merely relative illusions born from an extremely limited biological and psychological perspective. With sharp metaphors, Zhuangzi exposed the delusion of perception. Humans see a muddy puddle and feel disgusted and dirty, but to a pig or a loach, that puddle is the softest and coolest paradise. Humans see water as something to drink, but if submerged in water, humans will suffocate. Meanwhile, to fish, water is the entire survival space, the breath and the life. Zhuangzi's overthrow continued to reach the most abstract and supreme concepts. Humans always pride themselves on beauty and truth. Zhuangzi gave a profoundly mocking example of Mao Qiang and Shi, two stunning beauties considered the standard of beauty in the human world. Humans seeing them are enchanted, admiring, and willing to trade entire kingdoms. But when Mao Qiang and Shi step to the riverbank, fish, seeing their shadows, immediately dive deep into the water in fear. Birds, seeing them frantically flap their wings, flying high into the sky. Deer, seeing them panic and run away headlong. Under Zhuangzi's lens, a sharp ontological question is posed. Among the four species, humans, fish, birds, and deer, which one is actually the holder of the universe's true beauty standard? The truth is there is no standard at all. What we call stunning is just a species-specific physiological reflex, a local human prejudice. When we take that local prejudice as a common metric and force all things to comply, we are committing a brutal, violent act against the diversity of reality. This imposition of reference systems is the cause, generating discrimination, mutual destruction, and the perpetual suffering of human life. The stagnation of human intellect is most clearly shown through the war between right and wrong, what Eastern philosophy calls the dispute of Shi and Fei. Confucianism says this is right. Mohism refutes, saying that is wrong. The one standing on this side sees glory. The one standing on the opposite side sees humiliation. Zhuangzi called this the trap of clinging to a fraction of truth. When you stand at one point on a circle to observe, you only see a limited curve, and you frantically Argue with the one standing at the opposite point to escape the prison of this meaningless argument. Zhuangzi proposed a concept of ultimate liberation, the axis of the Tao, instead of standing on the rim of the wheel and being swept into the spinning of right and wrong. The awakened person steps back, entering the center position of the wheel axle. At that empty and silent center, all opposing perspectives are accommodated, all limits of reference systems are blurred. You no longer have to defend your rightness, nor do you need to destroy the wrongness of others. You realize that a crane having long legs is the nature of the crane. A duck having short legs is the nature of the duck. Trying to cut the crane's legs to equal the duck's legs, or splice the duck's legs to equal the crane's, in the name of some perfect standard only, brings blood and tears. The first step on the journey toward absolute freedom is the act of manually smashing your own dualistic lens. Liberation does not come from proving you are right, but comes from completely dropping the need to judge the world. When you stop using the ego to measure the universe, reality will reveal itself before your eyes with the most pristine, magnificent, and intact beauty. All things are equal in their own existence. However, when the solid walls of right and wrong concepts are smashed, when the safe shell of the reference system is completely peeled off, the human mind must face the most terrifying existential shock. If all values in the world are just relative illusions, if there is absolutely no absolute boundary between entities, then is the existence of our own selves still authentic or not? Where is the evidence to affirm that the world we are hearing, seeing, and feeling right now is the truth, and not a simulated light streak created by another cognitive layer? When all things are flowing and transforming into each other endlessly, could it be that your entire life, with all these joys and heart-tearing pains, is essentially just a grand dream of some strange alien creature? Part 2. To completely smash the arrogance of the intellect and prove the extreme fragility of the so-called reality, Zhuangzi left humanity the greatest allegory, an anecdote that has haunted philosophy for over 2,000 years, the butterfly dream. The story is recorded extremely concisely but carries a terrifying ontological destructive power. One night Zhuangzi slept and dreamed he transformed into a butterfly. In the space of that dream, the existential experience occurred so vividly, authentically, and completely to the absolute level. That butterfly flapped its wings, fluttering among flowers, enjoying the complete freedom of the sky clearly, feeling every breeze gliding past its thin wings. In that moment, the butterfly had absolutely no memory of being Zhuangzi. It was a real butterfly living a butterfly's life with a butterfly's complete perception. But then suddenly Zhuangzi woke up startled. He opened his eyes, saw his human body, saw the familiar room, and dualistic consciousness immediately returned, firmly affirming that I am Zhuangzi, and becoming a butterfly just now was merely a dream. But right at that sharp boundary between dream and wakefulness, a lightning bolt of existential awakening tore through Zhuangzi's cognitive sky. He asked himself a question shaking the entire foundation of epistemology. Ultimately, is it Zhuangzi dreaming of becoming a butterfly, or is there some butterfly dreaming of becoming Zhuangzi? To the ordinary thinking of an adult, this question sounds like a crazy wordplay or a useless speculation. But if we hold the phenomenological scalpel to dissect this experience, we will face a chilling truth. When you are deep in a dream, your entire sensory system is completely deceived. In a dream you still see colors, still hear sounds, still feel pain when tripping, and still taste the sweetness of food. Your mind, while dreaming, does not know it is dreaming. It receives that illusory world as an ultimate and singular reality. So what solid evidence is there to affirm that the state where you are opening eyes, breathing, going to work, and interacting with society right now is not a grander and more sophisticated dream projected by another cognitive layer? The fatal flaw of human perception is we always use the very mind imprisoned inside this three-dimensional space to measure the authenticity of that space. Zhuangzi's inability to distinguish if he is a human dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of a human is not a dead end of thought, but the most spectacular overthrow of the ego concept. If the boundary between reality and dream can be erased so easily, then the rigid I we always pride ourselves on and strive to protect is essentially just a loosely structured temporary product. That I is like a temporarily assigned role on a giant theater stage. Sometimes it plays a philosopher named Zhuangzi. Sometimes it incarnates into a tiny butterfly. Both existential states are authentic in their own reference systems, and both are empty when compared against each other. The solidity of identity, the attachment to a name, a social status, or an asset block, turns out to be just a blind clinging to a dancing ghost in a long unawakened dream. From the collapse of the reality dream boundary, Zhuangzi advanced to an exquisite ontological concept to completely liberate human freedom, the transformation of things. In Zhuangzi's universe there is absolutely no entity, isolated or frozen in an eternal shape. Life and death, humans and animals, dreams and reality are all just different manifestations of the same single energy flow. Zhuangzi and the butterfly are not two antagonistic beings, but the continuation, the rhythmic transformation of the Tao. When you thoroughly understand this transformation principle, you will no longer be tormented by the question, who am I? Because I can be anything, and I am simultaneously nothing. This uncertainty does not push humans down a deep hole of fearful panic, but conversely it brings a supreme liberating power. If this entire life is just an illusory, dreamlike experience, if this body will eventually turn to dust to nurture sprouts, then why must we strain to compete, to resent, and to torture ourselves in prisons of fame and pride? The awakening to the butterfly dream is the act of dropping the greatest burden of existence. When you accept you are strolling in a dream, a cosmic scale, relief will envelop the mind. You still continue living, still working, still loving, but your interaction attitude with reality has been completely transformed. You play your role most completely and excellently, but you never identify your being with that role. When the play closes, when achievements are stripped away, or even when death knocks, you smile, peacefully receiving it as an inevitable scene transition into another dream of the Tao. However, realizing life is a dream directly and fiercely collides with the entire pragmatic value system of human society. Society always operates based on evaluating whether an individual is useful or not. We are forced to become effective tools, perfect screws to serve the civilization machine. If everything is relative, if the ego is just an illusion, then why must we sell our lives to achieve the title of a useful person in others' eyes? Does a survival method exist that completely reverses this prejudice, where voluntarily becoming a useless person An outcast marginalized by society is actually the pinnacle of wisdom and the most perfect strategy to preserve life amidst this danger-filled human world. Part 3. For thousands of years, human society has always been operated like a giant industrial machine where an individual's survival value is tightly bound to a brutally exploitative concept, usefulness. Right from when we were children going to school, we were infected with a dogmatic belief system that the ultimate purpose of human life is to become useful. We must study excellently, must sharpen our skills, sharply must become leading experts in some field, to contribute to the collective, to the nation, and to humanity. Under the dualistic lens, the useful are hailed, rewarded and coated with labels of success, while the useless are trampled, despised and marginalized from existence. This invisible pressure forces humans to continuously strain, turning themselves into the most effective tools, the most perfect gears to fit into the common machine. But the existential tragedy of excellence lies in the fact that when you prove you are a good tool, you will immediately be used. The more useful you are, the more you are exhausted. The race for usefulness is essentially a collective suicide where humans voluntarily sacrifice their original vitality in exchange for a few frivolous praises from exploiters. Zhuangzi, with the piercing vision of a great sage, saw straight through to the bottom of this deadly trap. He proposed a dialectic, completely reversing all value metrics of humanity through the philosophy of the usefulness of the useless. Zhuangzi pointed out a cruel survival law in nature. Any tree with a straight trunk and solid wood that can make pillars or boats will certainly be cut down first by loggers. Any well with the sweetest, purest water will certainly be drawn dry by humans competing for it. Any beast with a stunning coat, any bird with a melodious voice, will certainly become the hunting target of trappers. The usefulness we are frantically pursuing from Zhuangzi's perspective is the earliest arriving death sentence. When you show off talent, when you strain to display outstanding excellence, to satisfy the craving, to affirm the ego, you are turning yourself into a brilliant, tasty bait amidst the human world full of the claws of envy and greed. That brilliance does not bring peace, but it only attracts attention, attacks, and exploitation from the outside world. To illustrate the life-preserving power of uselessness, Zhuangzi told a classic fable about a gnarly, great tree growing by the road. A carpenter named Shi passed by, saw a giant tree, its shade covering a whole area, its trunk too massive for dozens of people to embrace. The carpenter's disciples gathered around, marveling at the tree's greatness, but carpenter Shi only glanced and walked straight away without bothering to turn his head. When the disciples questioned, he answered coldly, "That is a worthless tree, useless wood. Its trunk is crooked and bumpy, cannot be used for house pillars. Its wood grain is crumbly. If made into boats, they will sink. If made into coffins, they will rot quickly. In short, it is a completely useless tree." That night the giant tree appeared in the carpenter's dream and delivered a fatal blow to his reference system. Do you dare use useful trees to compare with me? Fruit trees like apple and pear, because they are useful when fruits ripen, they are stripped bare by humans' branches, are brutally broken, ultimately dying young halfway. I have long strived to practice achieving uselessness, not letting anyone exploit me for anything. Thanks to that absolute uselessness, I preserved my life, avoided human axes, to then stand tall, live thousands of years, and cast shade, protecting the whole world. You use the narrow reference system of a woodcutter to judge my existence. Is that not too stupid? Zhuangzi's phenomenology exposed the nature of the value concept. Usefulness or uselessness is not the inherent nature of a thing, but it depends entirely on the perspective of the profiteer. The tree is considered useless for the carpenter's carving needs but becomes extremely useful for its own life because thanks to that it is free to live its heaven-decreed lifespan fully. This philosophy delivers a powerful awakening blow to exhausted souls in modern society. We do not need to strain and drain our vitality chasing the value metrics of bosses, crowds, or social trends. The fact that you cannot advance to the most powerful positions, you do not own massive assets, or you are mocked by society as a mediocre, useless person, is not a tragedy. Under Zhuangzi's lens, that is a grand grace of the Tao. Uselessness in people's eyes is the most solid armor for you to protect the mind's emptiness, preserve original energy, and escape the system's exploitation loop. You step back, hide your sharpness, accept being an ordinary person to enjoy a carefree life, unthreatened by anyone, unexploited by anyone. That is the art of hiding the light, to nurture life at the highest level. However, retreating to hide and accepting uselessness does not mean we must flee to deep mountains or cut all ties with the human world. We still must continue existing, must earn a living, must interact and go through extremely complex social structures full of conflicts, traps, and deadly collisions. If the living attitude is not showing off talent, not competing for usefulness to preserve life, then when forced to act, when directly facing the messes of tangled social relationships, what skills will the awakened person apply to solve problems? Does a practical combat method exist helping humans split giant difficulties, going through all obstacles smoothly and perfectly, completing all tasks without chipping away a single bit of own vitality, exactly like a thin blade easily passing through a giant block of flesh and bone without ever getting dulled? Part 4. Although the philosophy of uselessness brings a perfect shield to protect life, humans cannot always hide in the dark corners of the world. We are thrown into an objective reality full of complex social structures, tangled relationship networks, cruel conflicts of interest, and inescapable survival pressures. Life is like a giant block of flesh and bone, tangled and full of solid obstacles. When facing that rough block of reality, the instinctive reaction of the way ego is to use muscle power and subjective will to intervene. We rush to solve problems by colliding directly, arguing with a toxic boss, fighting with a spouse in pointless debates, or straining to smash the barriers blocking our advancement. But with every such violent collision, our original vitality is chipped away a little. The exhaustion, depression, and empty state of modern humans are the inevitable consequences of continuously using one's life force to hack into the rigid bones of life. We solve the problem, but simultaneously we also kill our own source of life energy to provide a perfect action method helping humans go through all adversities without getting hurt. Zhuangzi told a great symbolic anecdote, the story of Cook Ding cutting up an ox. The anecdote says Cook Ding slaughtered an ox for Lord Wenwei to see. All his movements, from moving his hands, leaning his shoulders, stepping his feet to swinging the knife, were rhythmic and perfect, like a sacred dance, the sound echoing smoothly like a piece of ultimate royal music. In just a blink, the giant ox was dismantled part by part, neatly without the meat, and bones being crushed. Lord Wenwei was extremely amazed by this superhuman technique. But Cook Ding put the knife down and answered with a statement, overthrowing the entire concept of skill. What your servant loves and pursues is the Tao. It has gone far beyond ordinary butchering skills. Cook Ding explained that bad butchers use strength to hack bones, so in just 1 month, the knife breaks and must be replaced. Better butchers use the knife to cut tendons and flesh, so they replace the knife once a year. But Cook Ding's knife has been used for 19 years, slaughtering thousands of oxen, yet the blade is still sharp and shiny as if just sharpened from the whetstone. The secret of that 19-year unchipped blade lies in Zhuangzi's deepest phenomenological principle, using what has no thickness to enter where there is a gap. Cook Ding analyzed that no matter how huge and complex the OXS body structure is, between the joints between the tendons and flesh, there always exist empty spaces, invisible gaps. Meanwhile, his knife blade is sharpened so thin it has no thickness. When bringing an object with no thickness into an empty space, it can freely meander, strolling inside that giant structure, while the empty space is still vast and abundant. Cook Ding never uses fleshly eyes to look at the ox, because fleshly eyes will be deceived by its giant and terrifying mass. He uses spirit, meaning the completely empty and still mind, to feel the operation of the structure. His blade slips past all bones, follows exactly the natural cracks of creation, absolutely never touches the sticky ligaments, and stays even further away from the big hard bones. By not creating any collision or resistance force, the thin blade completely defeats the giant physical block of the ox, perfecting the work without harming its own entity. The image of Cook Ding's blade is the greatest metaphor for human vitality and mind, while the ox is the panorama of social life troubles. Zhuangzi is teaching us the art of preserving life right in the eye of existential storms. When you face a financial crisis, an emotional betrayal, or a toxic working environment, those are the rigid bone blocks of the ox. If you use an ego full of resentment and fear to resist directly, you are using your vitality blade to hack straight into boulders. Your knife will chip, your mind will shatter, and you will fall into the ultimate realm of depression. The art of the wise is to step back, entering a state of absolute stillness, to observe the entire structure of the adversity. Any system, no matter how perfect and terrifying, also contains gaps of transformation. You slip your mind through those gaps, using yielding flexibility and undefined wisdom to untangle the problem, following its most natural path. You solve the conflict without wasting a single forced drop of sweat, completing the task while the soul still retains its sharpness, purity, and emptiness, just like the beginning. You are in the mud of the world, but the world cannot scratch a tiny mark on your cognitive blade. Applying the Cook Ding philosophy has brought humans to the pinnacle of action, art, and perfect survival capability amidst the human world. By hiding brilliance, to become useless, to preserve life while possessing the ability to slip through all gaps of reality, to not be hurt. An individual seems to have completely mastered the game of the material world. All social chains, all attacks of adversity are neutralized before an infinitely sharp and flexible mind, however, is stopping merely at knowing how to cope and slide past worldly troubles. The ultimate Destination of a grand, awakened one, protecting the life-blade from chipping is indeed a great achievement, but that knife ultimately just wanders around the meat block of an ox. Zhuangzi's mind with an amplitude stretching across the universe never accepts such a defensive and ground level liberation. When all burdens of right and wrong judgments have been shed, when the survival art has reached perfection, humans must execute one final grand leap to tear apart the entire cognitive sky. That is a realm of ultimate soaring flight, where there is absolutely no reliance anymore, no reference system that can bind. So what magnificent form does that absolute freedom realm named wandering in absolute freedom actually carry? And how can a tiny human transform into a Peng bird spreading giant wings covering 90,000 miles to fly straight into the void of the universe? Part 5. The cognitive surgery journey of Zhuangzi does not merely stop at smashing narrow reference systems, nor does it linger around preserving life amidst worldly troubles. Those are merely defensive preparations. The ultimate destination of a grand awakened one, the greatest overthrow to break all ontological limits, is completely portrayed by Zhuangzi in his first and most magnificent chapter, Wandering in Absolute Freedom, with an imagination beyond all frameworks of space and time. Zhuangzi opens with the image of a cosmic scale transformation. At the bottom of the dark northern ocean, there is a giant fish named Kun, its body thousands of miles long. That fish lies hidden under the deep ocean, representing the primitive, silent, and unexploited potentials of consciousness. Then one day the Kun fish transforms into the Peng bird. The back of the Peng bird is as great as a mountain range when it flaps its wings to fly. Its wings cover the whole sky like giant clouds hanging down from the ninth heaven. The Peng bird relies on fierce typhoons soaring to a height of 90,000 miles, leaving the entire tiny human realm below to begin a grand journey towards the Southern Ocean, towards the realm of creation and absolute freedom of the Tao. But right when that grand Peng bird takes flight, a fiery existential conflict between cognitive layers immediately occurs. Down below in the bushes, a cicada and a young quail look up at the sky and mock the soaring eagle. They sarcastically tell each other, we just need to flap our wings once to reach the treetop. If we fail, we fall to the ground. That is already enough freedom and happiness. What on earth is that giant bird flying up 90,000 miles for? Through this mocking, contrasting image, Zhuangzi exposed one of the most bitter tragedies of humanity, the impossibility of communicating between reference systems of different amplitudes. The cicada and the quail are metaphors for ordinary vulgar people minds, imprisoned in the narrow cages of fame, usefulness, and petty survival calculations. They use their tiny metrics to judge the realm of a great sage. You cannot bring the concept of the ocean to talk to a frog in a well, just as you cannot bring the concept of ice and snow to explain to an insect that only lives in summer. The freedom of the quail is a limited freedom tied to a few branches, while the freedom of the Peng bird is the craving to break the sky vault, overturning all physical limits to merge into the infinite realm of the universe. However, no matter how great the Peng bird is, no matter how wide its wings span, Zhuangzi, with his cruel, phenomenological vision, still handed down a cold judgment. The Peng bird has not yet achieved absolute freedom. Why? Because to fly to the height of 90,000 1,000 miles the Peng. Bird still must rely on one thing, that is the wind. Without the typhoons of the northern ocean blowing up those giant wings, also become useless, and the Peng bird will fall to the ground. Zhuangzi calls this state of having to rely on external conditions reliance. The reliance concept exposes the illusion of freedom of modern humans. We are proud that we are free because we have much money, free because we have power, free because we have social status. But essentially all that freedom is clinging to things outside your ontological structure. If the market crashes, if power is stripped away, if others withdraw their admiration, that illusory freedom also instantly vanishes into thin air, pushing you down into the abyss of suffering and despair. As long as your happiness and peace still depend on some condition in the objective world, you are still merely a slave, a prisoner, strolling in your own golden cage. To liberate humans from the trap of reliance, Zhuangzi proposed the greatest revolutionary concept of Eastern philosophy: non-reliance, meaning absolute freedom, no longer depending on any condition. Wandering in absolute freedom is not a physical trip going from one point to another, but a spiritual realm at the ultimate level, where the human mind leisurely strolls in the empty realm of the universe. To achieve the non-reliance state, Zhuangzi pointed out 3 final shedding operations. The ultimate person has no self, the spiritual person has no achievement, the sage has no name, meaning the great wisdom must completely destroy the ego, have no self, no longer cling to achievements and merits, have no achievement and erase all cravings for fame or status, have no name. When the I has been smashed, when the boundary between subject and object no longer exists, you will no longer fear praise or blame, no longer be entangled in gain or loss, and even overcome the most primal obsession about life and death. You become one with the universe, following the natural laws of heaven and earth, riding the transformations of the 6 energies to wander in the infinite realm. At this point you do not need wings to fly, do not need money to be happy, do not need anyone to recognize you to feel valuable. Your existence itself is an absolute perfection that cannot be depleted, cannot be stripped away by any force. Closing the great epic of wandering in absolute freedom, we realize that all the suffering, torments, and suffocation of this life originate from us manually building prison cages and voluntarily stepping inside. We are imprisoned by others' reference systems, tied by the fear of becoming useless, and exhausted by continuously clinging to the frivolous conditions of the external world. Zhuangzi's philosophy is the most intense awakening call, inviting us to smash all cognitive chains, tear apart the net of narrow dualistic metrics, to reclaim our own original free entity. That freedom does not lie in how high you can fly or how far you can go on the world map, but it lies in whether your mind has enough strength to shed all reliance, all judgmental views or not. Now when the dualistic lens has shattered, when the butterfly dream has exposed the fragility of reality, when uselessness has become the ultimate armor, an infinite void is opening before your eyes. Will you continue being a quail hovering from branch to branch within the narrow prejudices of society, or are you ready to transform into a grand Peng bird? Smash the illusory ego, rely on absolutely nothing, and take flight straight into the wandering realm of absolute freedom.